Hi there. Welcome to the Boardwalk. Welcome to episode 3 of the Boardwalk, the weekly podcast where 3 former military analysts talk about a specific aspect of the war in Afghanistan in an effort to help our listeners better understand the actions and conditions that led us to where we are now. I'm Zach, and with me as always are my friends Kyle and Stu. Gentlemen, how are we today?
Doing pretty good, Zach. Yeah, hanging out and pretty nice weather here, and just looking to get talking about some cultural differences today.
Yeah, real excited about this topic tonight. It's going to be good.
All right, so a quick show note. Last week we pushed out our first 2 episodes in about a 3-day span. And I think we were pretty amped after that first one, so we just rolled right into the next episode the next day. But from here on out, the plan for now is we'll be releasing episodes on Saturday. So, moving on to the show. As it stands right now, the United States has begun to withdraw remaining troops, contractors, and salvageable equipment from Afghanistan, with the current plan to be completely out of the country by September 11th, 2021. In episode 2, we talked about the American strategy and its overall lack of consistency. And towards the end of that episode, we introduced today's topic, which is the culture in Afghanistan. So today we'll be discussing ethnic and tribal dynamics and relationships and how Western diplomacy and morality clashed with our Afghan partners. As a note, throughout this episode, you're going to hear a lot of names of tribes, regions, and people. And we're going to do our best to explain this stuff as we go along and may even try to include some contextual information in the show notes for our listeners. So with that said, gentlemen, who wants to kick off explaining the cultural tribal differences in Afghanistan?
Well, I think it's important to look at Afghanistan as a country basically made up by Westerners, containing several different population groups. So you've got from anywhere the massive majority, well, not even the majority, but the largest number of Pashtuns in the country, followed closely by some other people up north in the country, and then Hazaras there in kind of central part of the country. Would you say, Zach? That kind of make up the Shia population of the country. There's just a bunch of different groups, and they all have different interests, but they're all kind of stuck in the same Western drawn border state.
Yeah. So the best way to probably break the country down would be ethnically, which generally you have the Pashtuns going around the southern and eastern borders of the country. Then they're what, like 40% of the country, give or take. Then you have the Tajiks, which are located mainly like in the northwestern and kind of northern area of the country. You have the Hazaras, which are sort of the big group in the middle of the country, and then you have a mix of like Tajiks and Uzbeks in the north. And then there's like 20 other ethnic groups that make up like 1% of the population. But and then beyond that, those ethnic groups get broken down into tribes, which most of the population will be a part of, and it's largely like a territorial basis for the tribes.
Yeah, and you're not going to like identify necessarily, well, at least in the Pashtun world, you're not going to identify as a Pashtun. You'll identify as whatever tribe or sub-tribe of that tribe you are. So, um, and the fact that generally throughout history, most of the country has been illiterate has kind of led at least Western interventionists in the country. I mean, all the way back to the British, um, kind of being unable to piece together what's going on because these histories aren't necessarily written down. And that's a huge issue when you're talking about tribes in Afghanistan, particularly in the Pashtun regions.
Yeah, the Pashtun region is definitely, if you were to look at Afghanistan and kind of to to give the audience a better understanding, to compare it to the geography of the U.S., southern Afghanistan would kind of fit those stereotypical tropes people have about the southeastern United States. Both geographically, it's the same part of it's the equivalent location in Afghanistan, but the southern Afghans, the Pashtuns, are seen as more backwoods. They're certainly less educated, partially because of lack of resources and also because of their strict adherence to traditional their traditional values. Then you look at Western Afghanistan, your Herat, Farah, and that area is considered more cultural, more artsy, very similar to what we would consider California, Oregon, Washington, that tech corridor. And then northeastern part of the country is kind of similar to our northeastern part of America, where there's a little more inclusivity. The capital, Kabul, is up in that area, but for the most part, we'll be focusing on southern Afghanistan and the Pashtun tribe, who makes up about, like Stu says, something like 40 or 42% of the population. They're not a majority, but they are the biggest bloc in the country. And you see that with most of the leaders of Afghanistan have been from the Pashtun regions.
Yeah, and something interesting. So you kind of like Kyle said, it's sort of hard to tell like the histories of groups sort of moving in and out of Afghanistan, and there was a lot of frequent movement throughout this area because it was part of the what was it, the Spice Road?
Silk Road.
Yeah, Silk Road. There we go. Thank you. Going from the Far East over into the Mediterranean areas. Like for example, the Hazaras, they have features that you generally see more in like Southeast Asia because they're essentially the remnants of the Mongolians when they they were operating along the Silk Road in Afghanistan. And so there's a huge amount of like ethnic diversity throughout the different regions, and it's not it's like by rule generally regional, but I mean you'll get mixtures of like Tajiks and Pashtuns, along the borders of the West, and Hazaras exist, throughout Afghanistan in small pockets, but we're just trying to go broad for the purposes of this podcast.
Yeah, for the most part, the tribes do, or that these are ethnicities before they're tribes. It's the equivalent of how we would view race. I think that's a fair assessment of how we talk about these groups, right?
Yeah.
It's more of a racial equivalent. The Hazaras are, yeah, they're central Afghanistan. You go to a place like Kabul, and there's certainly a lot more. There's a greater amount of diversity. You'll have Tajiks living next to Pashtuns, living next to Pashais, which is another small ethnic group living next to Hazaras. It's a little less traditional. They're a little more willing to live and work around each other. You go to the far corners in northeast Afghanistan, in the Badakhshan, you've got what we refer to them as Chinese Afghans. They're native Afghans, but they are ethnic Chinese, right? And they blend into the Uyghur population of Western China, and you see some of that up there. You go to that north central part of the country where it borders all the stands, and you get your Uzbek population and some of your Tajik population, and there's a lot of ethnic similarities between the Uzbeks and obviously Uzbekistan that's right over there, and so there's some cultural similarities. And for the most part, Afghanistan is, especially in those rural areas, very much self-segregated. You can go to a village in the middle of Kakrez district in Kandahar province, and there's a good chance that a lot of those career farmers have probably never left their village. Right? It's very much isolated when you get to the more rural parts of the country.
Oh yeah, I mean, in some areas, early on, and even later into the war, you'd have U.S. troops go into an area, and the people would ask, "Are you guys Russians? Like, what are you doing here?" So there's some very very isolated areas, and it's just kind of interesting how little information goes between villages and some of the really mountainous zones of the Hindu Kush out there.
Yeah, that's interesting you bring that up, Stu, as far as like, are you guys Russians? It kind of just shows, in Western civilization, we have a very clear delineation of time too. I think maybe that's not the same, when you're so isolated from the rest of the country. It's like, it's kind of hard to keep up with anything that goes on outside your village, especially when everybody's so confined to one location.
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that, when you got past that initial "Are you guys Russians?" which lasted, that lasted over a decade, right? There were still villagers, especially in northern Afghanistan, who they knew that the Russians had left, but there were parts that didn't know that there was a whole new war kicking off. And then the war finally got to them, and you saw some more of that reaction. But even then, looking at these tribal dynamics, especially in the South, and we're going to get into a little more detail on this. The Pashtun tribe, I think, is a great example of, or I guess the Pashtun ethnicity is a great example of,
The Pashtun tribes, probably.
yeah, tribes. There you go. That's a great example of just how diverse Afghanistan is without, in my opinion, being all that diverse. You have within the Pashtun tribes, there's an old RC South, which is Regional Command South, PowerPoint slide that kind of broke down the Pashtun tribes of southern Afghanistan. And there's probably 35 tribes on there or sub tribes on there, and it goes down like 4 or 5 levels, right? It's a very, very complex relationship that these tribes have with one another. And some of the relationships are good, some of them are bad. A lot of the negative relationships are based on economic matters, not so much siding with Taliban, although that does play a role, especially I think in southeast Kandahar. But you have all these different groups, and if whenever I see people talking about uh, race relations in America, my old adage used to be go to Europe and tell me that we have race problems, because I've always found that Europe's pretty damn racist. And then I went to Afghanistan, and it blows everything out of the water compared to any issues we have here or they have in Europe. Is nothing like what you have in especially southern Afghanistan, where you have these just lifelong blood feuds with another tribe, and it makes zero sense because everything about them is the same. They live in the same area, they practice the same religion, they speak the same language. The only difference is one of them's on a different side of the river.
Yeah, and you come into that as an American too, and it's like you kind of you could step right into the middle, and we'll talk about this too. And really, I think I covered it on the Green and White podcast. It's talked about in that book we mentioned last time, No Good Men Among the Living. But you're an American, you might come in out of the blue looking for the leader of the Taliban and step right into the middle of a generations long blood feud between two tribes, and that kind of that's going to cause some serious problems to American credibility in the region.
Oh, absolutely. We went there completely. We were unprepared culturally, right? But we went to Iraq unprepared from a culture standpoint. That really outside of the wars we fought in Europe, that's probably the status quo or the default, right? Over time, you start to learn the culture and be a little better prepared when you go into a theater. So we get to Afghanistan, and I was reading No Good Men Among the Living today, and they're talking about when coalition forces or American forces met Gulag Ashurzai, who he was a big power player in Kandahar province, right? And American forces show up, and we don't know the language, we don't know anybody, but here's this rich dude who probably speaks some sort of English or has somebody among his posse or his group that speaks some sort of English, and he was our liaison for the first couple years, and he took total advantage of his power. And if you read No Good Men Among the Living, one of the things you have to remember is that we wiped out the Taliban very quickly when we got to Afghanistan because the Taliban wasn't prepared for our military capabilities. I remember hearing stories about the Taliban. Obviously, they operated pretty free-willing, and then we showed up with the ability to fight at night, and that just knocked them back to the point that a lot of them left, a lot of them defected, a lot of them came forward ready to surrender. So there wasn't an enemy. So Gulag Ashurzai did what any good Pashtun would do, and he abused his power to take out his enemies, whether they were rival farmers, rival opium traffickers, just people who had generally wronged him or his family in the past. And that still is the pervasive mindset, especially in southern Afghanistan.
Yeah, the Galaga Shirzai was certainly. I mean, is I mean, I talk about him as if he's dead. As far as I know, he's still alive, and he was certainly an interesting figure when we were there. Much more so, much more powerful earlier in the war, when he could basically direct us to go run hit jobs on his enemies for him. Using night vision goggles and stuff. That was a lot easier than having his own tribesmen go attack somebody with an AK when you can just, send some special forces in the middle of the night to go round
Yeah.
up their whole family. So, I mean,
and he would get paid.
and he would get paid for it. Yeah, for sure.
Like we were so like we pay our sources, right? That's a tried and true way of keeping sources. Is you give them money, they will keep reporting for you. And we were giving Gulag Ashurzai money, and he'd go, "Oh yeah, that guy Mullah Saeed, he lives 3 doors down from me. He's the Taliban judge." No, he's not. Mullah Saeed's just a dude who didn't want to do business with Gulag
It's the
Ashurzai.
old double dip maneuver. I mean, and that, had some pretty, long-reaching consequences because we were doing this essentially like throughout Afghanistan. You'd have essentially a heavily contested area with several power brokers, and we pick the ones that we like, and they would essentially hand feed us their enemies, and that would create power vacuums for the Taliban to move in, and that's kind of disrupted a lot of these areas that we're still struggling to gain control of, even to this day.
Oh, for sure. Who was Kyle? Who was the Muj commander out in the west? That wasn't MMK, was it?
Sayyaf,
Yeah,
Abdul Rasul Sayyaf, I believe.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and he was he's out in the west in Herat. He's got a little T-34 or something, or maybe a T-72 in front of his house or something like that.
Yeah, but he took part in that. Mullah Muhammad Kel or Muhammad Mullah Kel, I can never remember how it goes. He took part in that. Abdul Rashid Dostum, who, if you've seen that movie 12 Strong, he's the Afghan liaison essentially that the special forces guys linked up with. In reality, Abdul Rashid Dostum he's an ethnic Uzbek. He was a mujahid, or he was really more of a militia commander. I would argue he's not overly religious. He was a militia commander during the Soviet era, and he's still a pretty influential guy today, right? But there's no doubt that he took part in this and identifying just general enemies and abusing the access with the American forces to remove them. Not always by killing them, but just detain them once a month. That would be enough to get them to leave sometimes.
Among his other various war crimes that he's responsible for.
Yeah, right. I mean, there's too many to name. We can't keep up with all those. But like I was looking here at the tribal structure, and we could talk about that. We mentioned Gulaga Shirzai, a power broker in the south, who's a Barakzai, Durrani, basically a branch off the Durrani Pashtuns, and he's a Barakzai. Hamid Karzai was a Popalzai, and the Popalzais and the Barakzais they generally get along pretty well. But you have all these other tribes. When we came in, and I'm talking like Tajiks, Uzbeks, Hazars. I mean, we came in and basically we said, all right, we're going after the Taliban, largely made up of Pashtun people. We're going to go after the Taliban, and then we're going to create this state, this Islamic state of Afghanistan, and and we're going to have you all work with the United States to root out the Taliban. So we basically, cast this giant net over all these people groups and said, let's fight the Taliban when they already have way bigger beef with each other than they do with the Taliban. So it's kind of just stepping into a big old hornet's nest, and while we try to accomplish an objective to get rid of the Taliban or Al Qaeda or whatever.
Okay, it's fair to say that those regional Muj commanders, when we showed up, had bigger issues in their heads other than the Taliban, But that's all we were concerned about. So they used it to their advantage.
Yeah, and with those sort of regional, like ethnic and tribal concerns, we didn't help anything at all by encouraging the Afghan National Army to be largely Tajik, especially in the south. That caused plenty of issues.
That is when you look at it's not even a tactical or a strategic error, right? You took who would join the army, and it was the Northern Tajiks, right? They're the warrior class of Afghanistan, and you got to work with what you got. So, if you watched the Vice documentary, This Is What Winning Looked Like, or if you just Google an image for Afghan National Army Helmand Province, you're going to see a picture of Afghan National Army soldiers. Okay, then I want you to Google Pashtun tribe or Pashtun people. They look nothing alike because there are very few Pashtuns compared to Tajiks joining the Afghan National Army. So now we've got former Northern Alliance fighters. They're down in Helmand or they're down in Kandahar, and they're doing these patrols through villages, and they're asking villagers, Haji Sahib, which is the general term for an older male that you don't know, roughly translates into sir, like with some dignity to it. And they're asking if there are any Taliban here, and of course they're going to say no because they don't trust the Tajiks in the first place.
And the crazy thing is they'd sometimes have to have translators because they didn't speak the same regional dialect.
Yeah, Tajiks speak Dari, which is a Persian language, or more Persian language, I guess. Pashtu is also technically Persian, right? But there's just enough differences that they would need translators.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge difference in Dari and Pashto. I mean, Pashto is basically an indigenous language in Afghanistan. Dari is basically Persian Farsi. But Dari is still the main language of the government, and even though Pashto is spoken by the majority, 40-something% of the population, you have this majority people group in Afghanistan, and their language isn't even represented at Kabul because they speak Farsi there. So and you, like you said, you put Tajiks down there patrolling a bunch of Pashtuns. Yeah, nobody's going to trust anybody, and it leads to all sorts of problems.
Oh yeah. Were you there when we so whenever we would build products, we had our products set to our classification standards, and then there were certain products we had to make releasable to the Afghans, which that's referred to as rel Afghan. And most of our reporting, it would come in with whatever the classification is, and then below it would be the releasable to Afghans portion, which has certain things omitted from it, whether it's collections capabilities, objective names, things like that. They don't get access to. And most of our products were translated into Dari and Pashtu, and we were, running real close to the bell, right, trying to get this product turned in, and we were waiting on our translators. And for some reason, I think it was Ramadan, and so like our translators in theater just like weren't going to do it, and so we had to send it off to. There was like a cell in Texas or California. Like we emailed it to them, and the translators out there translated it and sent it back to us. And so we brief it, and we're all American. We don't know anything. The Dari slides were in Farsi, and holy shit, did it piss off some Afghan general.
No, I think I missed that. And when I say Dari is basically Persian Farsi, it pretty much is. It's just it's yeah, but there's definitely like an ethnic consideration when you make that. But I was not there. I missed that. But yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you just slap real Afghan on it and release it anyway? Who's gonna go through the hassle of really trying to figure out what's releasable and what's not.
Oh, it was utterly insane. And yeah, like I Dari and Farsi, it's like if you speak Spanish, you can probably read Italian and Portuguese. Like they're pretty closely related. It's kind of the same thing with Dari and Farsi. But yeah, some general. I know it wasn't Razak because he could barely read Pashto by that time. He may have been like one of the Helmand commanders. Yeah, he was not happy. The only thing I guess he said after the brief was that those slides are in Farsi.
It wasn't Wafadar, was it?
It may have been Wafadar.
Oh. Was it Wafadar, the king of failing upward? The king of failing upward.
General Wafadar.
Yeah, head of the Afghan National Army in Kandahar province. Yeah.
Oh god, he may have been almost as useless as Rahimullah Khan.
Oh, he's up there. I kind of feel like I feel like, and this is kind of a tangent. I feel like Wafadar was probably pretty cool at one point in his life and just kind of faded into being a terrible commander.
He will not be getting his own episode.
No, probably not.
Oh man, that guy.
But yeah, that seems like somebody who would say something like that. Just going by the personalities I knew. But yeah, back to the ethnic groups. I mean, I think for this podcast, we could go into like, it's just important for listeners to know that there are, we mentioned Pashtun, and that goes, the Pashtun people group breaks up into so many different tribes that all those tribes have like blood feuds or alliances with one another. And because they're generally illiterate, you kind of don't know what's going on unless somebody tells you. So it's like, I mean, there's nothing written down really about it. So it's hard to keep track of all of that. Whereas like when you go up further north or further west, these tribes are, a little bit better off.
And then, so the last part of this cultural differences portion, I think it's important to note the differences between the Shia and Sunni population within Afghanistan. So most of the country generally Sunni Muslim. You'll get Shia mainly along the Iranian border in the west, and also the most of the population of Hazaras are Shia, as well as the Western Tajiks. So, for listeners, basic difference between Shia and Sunnis, which is a huge deal in the Islamic world, is Shias felt like the successor to Muhammad needed to be like somebody in his bloodline, and the Sunnis felt like any like pious individual could be his successor. So it's kind of like a lineage thing versus like voting for the Pope.
I tend to side with the Sunnis in the idea, right? Like
yeah.
the role of ascension or succession, it should be the most qualified person. And the Sunni Shia split, and it's bigger in places like Iraq where it's like 50% or 52 or 51% Shia, 49% Sunni, something along those lines. It's more prevalent there, but it's basically the Islamic equivalent of the Troubles of Northern Ireland. It's the same religion with very minor differences, but just enough to piss somebody off. And you saw that with that car bombing in Kabul the other day at that girls' school. And that I doubt that was the Taliban. The Taliban typically won't target Shias because they still see them as Muslims. They would target a girls' school. I don't doubt that, but this is a predominantly Shia girls' school. I think that was the remnants of the Islamic State in the Khorasan province.
Yeah, so Islamic State's also going to be a lot more, and that's another problem. That's a whole different conversation, though, gentlemen, talking about the Islamic State there in Afghanistan. But yeah, Shia Sunni divide. Stu broke it down into a very basic, a very good explanation, but very basic explanation of the differences in those ideologies. But in Afghanistan, and I think Zach and Stu will agree with me, is those differences really aren't the driving differences of conflict. Religion is very important to the people, but whether or not they're Shia or Sunni is a lot less important than what tribe and who wronged who in the past. So that's kind of where the animosity gets drawn. Of course, Hazaras being a minority population, in addition to a minority religious ideology, are gonna they take a lot of the attacks. They come under attack a lot historically and in the present day, but it's less about them being Shia and more about them just being a minority.
So for this next session, we're going to go into some of the like cultural beliefs in Afghanistan, with the main one, and specifically Pashtun one, being the code of Pashtunwali. For some people might be familiar with this from the movie Lone Survivor. It's the whole reason that all of those Afghans protected Mark Wahlberg's character, because he was a guest that they were putting under their protection. And under Pashtunwali, you essentially go like full tilt. This person is under my protection, and I will fight to the death to keep them alive, as well as like some of the other principles within Pashtunwali. A lot of honor, a lot of loyalty to tribe, defending your land, that kind of stuff.
And it's important to note that Pashtunwali is pre-Islamic Afghanistan. So these people, before Islam ever got there, by way of conquering nations, I mean, these people were practicing this code, and to a certain extent, less so than being a good Sunni Muslim, is more about the way to be a good Muslim in southern Afghanistan is to kind of follow this code. This code takes precedence over any sort of Sunni dogma, essentially. So we can talk about some of the main principles of Pashtunwali, about especially like the three big ones: hospitality, asylum, and justice and revenge. Especially justice and revenge.
Yeah, I like how. So if you look at if you look at the list of Pashtunwali, which rough translation is Way of the Pashtuns, it's similar to like the Samurai Bushido Code or Hammurabi's Code or chivalry, which is more than just be nice to women. Pashtunwali has what I think it's 13, like 13 tenets, and the third one is justice. But I swear to God, if you're in Afghanistan, this is the first one.
Yeah.
Yeah, justice and revenge is absolutely huge. It's like we talked about earlier in the episode. It's what leads to these sometimes centuries long blood feuds. Like, and justice and revenge, at least in Pashtunwali, is based around coming to some sort of agreement. So if somebody steals your goat, you're obligated to at least return the favor or do something worse to them. So
you
and
could steal their goat, you can
yeah.
kill a goat and stuff like that.
Right. You can. I mean, obviously, to a certain degree. I mean, you're not supposed to just go and, what do they call it? Equivalent force or something like that. You got to respond with an equivalent force, eye for an eye. But that's super important because it leads to these centuries long blood feuds between tribes because they never sit down and have a shura to talk it out.
Well, isn't it kind of like just agreed upon amongst like if some guy from this village on this side of the Arghandab River steals a goat from this guy on that side of the Arghandab River, like isn't it basically just like the village elders get together and they determine what the appropriate recompense is?
Yeah, if there is a justice system, which we can talk about later, if there is a system for administering that justice, sure. But like Pashtunwali, I think by itself is you're forced to take revenge. I mean, that's the honorable thing to do. You have to take revenge, otherwise you're like a lesser man. So that's huge, especially with like nobody to sit down with the elders and talk it out and come to an agreement and it's important that there can't be a loser. We should talk about that. Yeah, there can't be a loser.
Especially with the younger generations that inherit these like Hatfield McCoy relationships with these other families that go back hundreds of years and that just continue escalating.
To Americans, Afghanistan's a 20-year-long war, and then to Afghans, it's a 50-year, just 500 Hatfield McCoy situations going on throughout the entire countryside.
Yeah, it's like it's
sometimes
like
the Americans raid us. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's like sometimes like the Americans just kind of entered into it, and now like this war's going on in the background of all this other stuff we have going on. So it's a bit different. It's not like the whole country is like, yes, there's a war. It's the government of the Islamic Republic of Afghanistan versus the Taliban. That's not how anybody really views it.
There's really like 3 or 4 wars going on right now.
Oh, probably minimum more than that. Yeah, probably more than that at the base level.
Yeah, those are just the official ones.
Right. When you look at justice and revenge, that's like that fuels all the warlords, right? Like Razik was just fueled by getting justice. And one of Kyle's Green and White episodes, he discusses, the Taliban killed his father and his uncle.
Yeah,
and that just fueled him until they got him. Like it was all driven on just hatred of the Taliban. From that point on.
If anybody followed the concept of Pashtunwali, it's probably General Razik, which is I think why he's such a revered figure.
Oh yeah, he absolutely did follow Pashtunwali. That's one of I remember when we're getting our personality briefs and they're kind of telling us about who all these people are, and you get to General Razik, and he's also a relatively devout Sunni Muslim. He didn't drink. He smoked like a fucking chimney, which I guess it's okay to do in Islam. Cause I swear to God, whether I was in Kuwait or Dubai or Afghanistan or Iraq, there isn't a Muslim alive that doesn't smoke, apparently.
Yeah, it's pretty popular, especially in that region. But
that's the 14th tenet of Pashtunwali.
But yeah, he's revenge against the Taliban literally fueled that man up to the point where it got him killed. Because anytime, and we'll talk about this in a Razik episode. Anytime that man could have walked away with more money than any of us ever could dream of owning in our lifetime, but he couldn't. He couldn't walk away, and that's I don't know if it's a power. I don't know if it's bound by this honor code that's so embedded in the. I would say it's almost embedded in the psyche of these people at this point.
Oh, it is.
This is pre-Islam, and the other two, we can talk. We talked about justice and revenge for quite a while. We could talk about the other two. Hospitality is the number one, just like in ancient Greece. like this whole hospitality thing. So we can
hospitality and asylum are why we went into Afghanistan in the first place, right? Like Mullah Omar, him and Bin Laden weren't necessarily on the best of terms, right? They were cordial. They worked together.
Mhm.
When you read, or if you read No Good Men Amongst the Living, Anand Gopal, he's from India. He's got a little better access than the three of us because he can blend in a little better. And he's talking to these old Taliban commanders, and according to them, Mullah Omar wasn't the biggest fan of Bin Laden to a point, but the Pashtunwali code of hospitality and asylum compelled him to protect his friend. And
Yeah.
so Donald Rumsfeld kept saying, "Give us Bin Laden," and as much as Mullah Omar seemingly wanted to, he couldn't do it. It's
Hmm.
very important in Afghanistan, especially in southern Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, Omar would have been seen as much less of a man had he done that, just because Pashtunwali is so embedded. I mean, if he had given Bin Laden up, it's like, I mean, he loses all credibility amongst the
Yeah,
Pashtuns.
even if the people would have agreed with the decision to hand him over because it violated the first and second tenets of Pashtunwali, he would have just disappeared into the ether and been nothing.
Hmm.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
very,
yeah,
yeah,
like I mentioned at the beginning, like for with the second tenet asylum, like that people are protected like at all costs. Like they were literally willing to go into what they knew could be a long protracted conflict with
eh,
the most powerful nation in the world because of Pashtunwali.
right, and there's something to be said about a code like that that's so embedded in your society. I mean, it's ancient, like
Hmm.
we said before, pre-Islamic. I mean, you see this in you read the Odyssey or you read the Iliad. I mean, these are the same tenets that are the especially the Odyssey. I mean, you read the Odyssey, that's like the tenet, hospitality. I mean, that could be a god, it could be somebody in your house, so you have to treat them with respect. So I think to some degree, a lot of that, is very ancient like that. It's interesting to read about for sure. Let's talk about some of the other principles, shall we?
Yeah.
Hospitality, asylum. I mean, if you've seen Lone Survivor, you kind of get a good. I mean, I don't know how accurate, really that is, but I mean, it's true that they became friends. I mean, he did protect him. He protected uh, his character. But
Marcus Luttrell.
yeah, Marcus Luttrell is the guy's name. Yeah, I mean, he was protected by the Afghan gentleman that picked him up. So I mean, good on
Yeah.
him.
So
But
so you got the 10, I guess we'll call them sub principles, and the first
Mhm.
one's bravery, right? Pashtun must defend his land, property, and family from incursions. Death can follow if anyone offends the principle. It's and really that second sentence kind of it gives it gives a reality of what happens if you can't do this, if you abandon your family, if the invaders show up to your village and you run away and they find you, you're gonna die,
Mhm.
right? And then that ties in really to the second one, which is loyalty. And I really like, if you look at these two, I when you work with the Afghans and you talk to them and you read about their way of life, I would put loyalty over bravery, right? Because I think loyalty supersedes that bravery. Because
right,
without that loyalty, they're not going to sit there and defend that stuff. But
Yeah.
in Afghanistan, it's at the tribal level. In America, I think we all will say that we're Americans, right? People in Texas will point out that they're Texans, right? But for the most part, we almost all will go, yeah, we're an American. And then you go to a place like Kandahar, and it's like, well, I'm an Alakozai Pashtun, or I'm an Achexai Pashtun, and they hate each other. But
yeah,
that's how that dynamic is down there, where it's loyalty to the family, friends, and then the tribe.
in
Nowhere
that
in the
order.
in the code of Pashtunwali is it
Yeah.
talking about loyalty to your district, your province, your country, not even your religion, right? To your immediate others.
Yeah, and I think that's super important. I mean, you have stuff like arbitration. We kind of talked about arbitration earlier with the, settling disputes at a jirga or the shura, where you get together and you hash it out and you come to an agreement, so everybody can walk away not offended as a loser, basically.
Yeah.
The idea of
And it's overseen by an elder, so there's no arguing with it. It's kind of similar to Japan in that way, in that like an older person is considered at a higher level than you are most
yeah,
of the time.
Confucianism. Yeah, I mean, you have to give
Mhm.
respect to elders above all. That
Yeah.
that's kind of yeah, especially in a place where people generally don't live very long. It's kind of Yeah, if you've made it, you kind of have some sort of wisdom, ideally,
Yeah,
at that point.
and the Jirga principle goes, all the way to the top levels of government. I mean, the two
Yep.
houses of Afghan parliament are the Walesi Jirga and the Meshrano Jirga, the House of the People and the House of Elders.
Yep. And is it the Mashrano Jirga is really just um, like I'm not going to say it's not ceremonial. They have the ability to veto, but they can't create legislation, right? But it's just elders.
Hmm.
Like it's basically just 102 elders, 3 from each province. Right?
Well, you
That's
have to
how
be at
important
least
this is.
35. You have to be at least 35, which
That's an elder
is
in Afghanistan.
that's about there for Afghanistan.
Remember, you said 30 looks like 50. That's good.
Hmm.
You know, but and that's how it works, right? And oh man, the Jirga is important. This idea of Jirga, or it basically means like council or session, is very important. And whenever Razik would come visit, or Wafadar, a couple of times he'd come visit. It was it was an all day thing, right? It wasn't he'd come for an hour, get a brief, talk to the boss, and leave. It was they sat around, they talked, they exchanged tea. It lasted hours because that's just how it works in Afghanistan. There are no quick solutions to anything in that country, and
Hmm.
that
No.
includes this, resolving petty local disputes. It's an all day thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing, and we can probably talk about this in a later episode, female honor, defending the honor of women in your family and tribe, women in general at all costs. So,
That seems to be the one element of Pashtunwali that the Pashtuns are lacking.
yeah,
Oh
it
yeah.
depends on how you interpret it. I mean, I'm sure they
Yeah,
don't interpret it as that they're lacking it. Um, defending the weak, manhood, being a man, and yeah, and also it mentions on this Hawad, which is a country obliged to protect the land of the Pashtuns. Note it does not say Afghanistan. It just
It's,
means protection of the Pashtun custom, not the nation of Afghanistan. That's really irrelevant.
oh yeah.
yeah.
When we were there, I had some fun. And I made a new sign to put outside my little cubicle, and instead of calling myself a Kandahar analyst, I call myself a Pashtunistan analyst, and everybody seemed to be okay with that because when you look at Kandahar compared to the rest of the country, well, Kandahar and Helmand and Uruzgan for that matter, compared to the rest of the country, it was night and day. It was completely different from what you would see if you went up to Mazari Sharif or up to Badakhshan or even Paktia.
Just remember that it's older than Islam, so it kind of predates that this whole Sunni Shia,
Yeah.
really any of that stuff. For this next section, we're going to talk about a topic that's not very comfortable, but one I think that needs to be addressed. The concept of bachabazi, and the concept of bachabazi is essentially that, and I don't know if it comes from a society devoid of interacting with women outside the home. So basically, you don't interact with women unless you get married to somebody that's set up for you. But it's basically the process of is having young boys, before they're men, they don't have beards and stuff. These beardless boys basically dress up and dance around at these parties where other older men attend, and whatever sexual relations come out of that. When I had heard that before I ever went to Afghanistan, I kind of thought it was just people being culturally insensitive. Even back in 2012, 2013, I was like, yeah, that seems very culturally insensitive to just tell me that the Pashtun people of Afghanistan just like to have sex with little boys. But the truth of the matter is, it's a big deal, and it happens quite often.
Yeah, there's the
And
old
yeah,
military joke of Man Love Thursday, which I think was more of an Iraq thing. But you hear that, and then you hear about Bachabazi kind of in the same breath with the sort of coarse humor and the military, and then you come to find out that, that it's very, very real,
it's
right?
very real and,
A
and
very
kind of
serious
a
problem.
deal, and it's
Yeah.
a very serious problem, and it's a very big. It's a very big. It can be a very big problem. We can talk about some of that. I would have the book every morning when we would meet at the war room table to give the night's report to the colonel. I had the book of bad news basically as my
I
because
remember that
yeah,
book.
the book of bad news, yeah, the bad news book, and that's what I called it. Was titled that. It was this green army workbook basically, and I'd be like, well, let's see what happened in the middle of the night. Well, if a checkpoint commander, and this happened not just once, but I mean several times while I was there, if a checkpoint commander had a boy that he was in love with, basically, or like that he was fond of, and he would buy him gifts and things. If that boy went to like another checkpoint commander and kind of changed allegiance, I suppose. Well, what would happen is the checkpoint commander, who had felt scorned by his bachabazi, would rally up his troops and go attack the other checkpoint commander down the road and get in a shootout, which would result in A&A and A&P and police and army people being killed. And this would happen at a not infrequent rate, a scary high rate, actually.
At least once a quarter, it felt like, at minimum.
That we knew of.
Yeah,
exactly.
That
we had reporting on.
If somebody got wounded or died, then we heard about it, and it was often.
Yeah, way too often.
And I'm going to throw in just an aside. So after you left, Kyle, I started doing some online schooling, and I had to take a social studies class. So I took a class on feminist and gender studies. And the book was written by, I'm going to throw his name out there because he's dead fucking wrong, Michael Kimmel. He was the guy that wrote my textbook about feminism. That you put that one together. And,
an expert, subject matter expert.
Clearly. In one of the chapters, we talk about how important it is to have sons and things like that, and to have daughters. And he wrote, and I don't know where the hell he got this, but he wrote that in Afghanistan, it was so important to have a son that if you didn't have a son, you would dress your daughter up as a boy, and it was a practice that the Afghans called bachabazi. Bachabazi roughly means what, like T-boy or chai boy, right? And it's a nice way of saying that boy is going to be molested for a couple years at an Afghan police checkpoint or at a party with rich Afghans.
Right.
Just Michael Kimmel, if you ever hear this, you're dead fucking wrong. And that's the problem with the American education system right there. How the hell did you not get that one fact checked? Right. But I digress. If you watch that Vice documentary, This Is What Winning Looks Like, you get a good insight into the psyche of the problem. You have this Marine major who is talking to a police. He's like a base commander or patrol commander, and there's this problem where they have a chai boy or a T boy who is being molested by these Afghans. Obviously, one of them tries to leave and gets shot in the leg. That happens very often too. You hear about a 12-year-old in Afghanistan getting shot at a police checkpoint. They're probably trying to run away. But the Marine major is talking to the commander, and he's old school Pashtun. He looked like he was probably real age 50, 55 years old. And they had subtitles, right? I don't speak Pashtun. And he said, "What do you expect me to do? Have them fuck their grandmother's pussy?" That was his response. That's how they respond to this issue of molestation, right? They don't see it as a problem. He goes on to justify it and say, my police officers, they were bachabazi 15, 20 years ago. It's the next generation's turn. And that's just how they view it. Like, bachabazi is, I think it's constitutionally illegal. I know it's for sure illegal in Afghanistan, but I'm pretty sure it's in the Afghan constitution that is an unacceptable practice, and it is completely unenforced in southern Afghanistan.
The Taliban, it was death penalty under the Taliban.
Yeah. Surprisingly, the one place that it's very harshly enforced is when the Taliban control an area.
Absolutely.
Just like, very harshly enforced, and also opium production too, which was at its lowest rate before we invaded, but that's a different story.
Well, until they understood economics.
Yeah, until they figured out they could make money off of it. But the interesting thing, we bring up bachabazi because it's an interesting topic to a lot of people, and the fact that my favorite stories to read, well, not really my favorite, but almost poetic justice, is when the Taliban would dress boys up like bachabazi, send them into a checkpoint, poison everybody, and then like shoot them all in the head while they slept.
Yeah.
That was an absolute brutal use of it. They would send this bachabazi in, this kid dressed up as Botchabot, he would serve them this poison tea or something.
That happened a few times.
Everyone would pass out or just like become really sick, and then the Taliban would just go in there and just start popping people on the head.
I know it happened once in Shawali Kot. It may have happened a second time.
I think it's happened several times.
I'm sure it did. I remember the first time I saw it, it happened in Shawali Kot, and I was like, what the hell is going on? And I think you talked to me about it because I was still a relatively new analyst in Afghanistan. Like, oh yeah, they poison them and then they go over there and they shoot them. They give the kid 500 Pakistani rupees, which is a couple bucks, and he goes and does it. Yeah. Call it good.
Right. Yeah, I mean that's good money if you're a 12-year-old in Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And two, there was another story I think everybody heard of when I think it was like a special forces sergeant first class and maybe a special forces captain. Like somebody had like this Afghan police commander. Somebody had like chained a boy to basically a bed, which is like rape him like day after day after day for like a week. And they eventually just went in there and just like I think just beat that guy up. I mean like literally like beat him within an inch of his life like this. Yep. And they got in trouble. Remember they got in trouble?
I remember that. Yeah.
Congress got involved. Like it was a whole thing.
Yeah, Congress got involved. I think they were restored, both the captain and that sergeant first class. I think they were basically cleared of their wrongdoing because I mean, what do you say to that? I mean, you could you could come in, and you could say, I mean, we could sit here and say, well, I mean, obviously there's cultural differences between the West and Afghanistan, but at a certain point, I mean, even the Taliban are like, yeah, Bachabazi, we're going to kill you if you do that. I mean, maybe we have more in common than we think.
I mean, they'll kill you for drinking alcohol too. So I mean,
is that a death penalty?
I don't know. I know it's punishable. They're hardliners, man.
They're hard. Yeah, they're hard. But I mean, come on, alcohol, Bachabazi. I mean,
they're Afghanistan's religious right.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. For sure.
But that highlights and to move off of the Bachabazi topic because I never feel comfortable talking about it this long. I don't think any of us do.
This is nervous laughter. Like it's not a fun.
It's great fun. It's great fun talking about this horror. Yeah. It's the only way we know how to suppress these horrible feelings that come up.
So but taking that and taking those interactions, and that's really how it is. Like region wide, not in the sense of Bachabazi happening, but there's the Afghan way, and the Afghan way didn't really mesh with the American way, be it diplomacy. Like we heard for so long that we were going to have this grand Loya Jirga, which is it's basically their equivalent of like a constitutional convention, right? And they're going to name just like the sole president and all that, and it didn't happen. And we ended up Afghanistan had a CEO. Which they made no money, so he did a terrible job, And then
that was a whole thing. So in the
yeah, it's a whole thing.
In the 2014 election, the guy that lost was very unhappy that he lost with good reason because it was
because he probably won.
Yeah,
probably.
It was also a fixed election. Yeah, for sure.
And so
he's a northern like Uzbek though, right?
Yeah. So basically,
he can't win.
I think he's Tajik. I think Abdullah's Tajik.
He's a Northern Alliance guy, and you can't win. In Afghanistan.
So basically, to prevent a civil war, he was given a mostly ceremonial position, but it was kind of like a vice president, except Afghanistan has two vice presidents that are below him, and so they made him the CEO of the country, whatever the hell that means. He was on the news sometimes. That's about all we saw.
It is the most made-up position in the history of government.
Yeah, it literally is made to prevent some sort of civil war. And I actually just looked up his article. His father was Pashtun, his mom is Tajik. So.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, he's half and half, I suppose. But but he also won. I mean, he basically won the election, and then we fixed it. So Ghani, our man who literally taught at Berkeley, like Afghans would. That still blows my mind that a guy who taught at Berkeley in the United States was a United States citizen had to give up his.
He was a U.S. citizen for 45 years.
Yeah. He was a U.S. citizen. Yeah, he had to give up his U.S. citizenship to become president of Afghanistan. You cannot tell me that the Afghan people were like, "Yep, Ashraf Ghani, Berkeley professor. He's our man. He's definitely our man." Yeah,
there's no way he won that election.
You'll never be able to convince me of that.
He wanted to.
I'm sure Karzai won the first one. Mm-hmm. I'm sure Karzai won the first election, right? There's no way. Yeah,
Yeah.
probably. There's no way Ghani won that election.
No way. I don't think Ghani won the last one either. Like, if we're being
Whatever.
honest. Yeah.
Afghan solutions for Afghan problems brought to you by the CIA.
Yeah.
I think
yeah. Anyway,
we made sure he was in there just because he kind of looks like Patrick Stewart, and Westerners just inherently trust him.
yeah, we appreciate that. I mean, now Ghani's a very intelligent man. I'm not going to go off that, but then like you read Fixing Failed States. I have his book. I've got Ashraf Ghani's book, and let me tell you that he does not follow any of the advice in there.
He wrote a book about fixing failed states?
Yeah, Ashraf Ghani's book is called Fixing Failed States.
Is he aware that he has not fixed any failed states?
Is he aware that he is president of a failed state? Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if he is or not. I think he's very interested in the topic, but I don't think we've had any solutions to it.
I'm sure he's very interested. I'm sure he's very interested in the obscene levels of Karzai money that he's making.
I wonder, man. I kind of feel like
you think he's honest?
Like he's just. I don't know. Is anybody honest?
That would be
in politics,
dude. While we were there, they were. I think at the time I got there, they were like number 1 or 2 was like the most corrupt country in the world, and then by the time you left, they had moved up to number 6.
Like, didn't we talk about that though, and say like which African countries devolved into civil war during that time?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think Afghanistan got any less corrupt. I think others just beat it to the punch.
Well, listen, as long as other people fail, they can keep moving up.
Correct. Yes, correct.
President Ashraf Ghani writing a book about fixing failed states is the equivalent of the mayor of Detroit writing a book about solving the housing crisis.
Yeah, that's true. But that's literally the title. I mean, I've got it on my bookshelf. It still blows my mind that man wrote a book that he clearly either has no intention of following or simply is not in a position to be able to follow it.
It's probably ghostwritten.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he's pretty smart. Pretty smart dude.
But so getting back getting back to these issues we see in southern Afghanistan, I think this is a good time to talk about the Afghan local police, who we talked about it a little bit in episode 1. I contend was a absolute failure. Right, so the idea of this Afghan local police was that you would have a certain number of people at all these local villages. They'd be getting paid technically by Afghanistan, really by the Americans.
United States, yeah, like everything else.
And they were supposed to kind of help keep the peace, right? Did we even arm them? I hope not, because that would have just gone to the Taliban.
All right, so
we armed them.
You guys missed.
We didn't give them uniforms.
You guys missed out on like the golden age of the ALP when it was kind of working. And to be fair, I wasn't really covering the South when we started doing it, but when I saw it working was when we had units out, like at least one unit per province, and usually several, and so we had sort of oversight of them, and we were able to like physically hand them their money instead of it being lost as it went down the pipeline of corruption that is the military over there. And so there were some successes. However, as we started drawing down between like 2013 and 2016, it got bad. Like, it got to the point where if they would patrol at all, they would have maybe one magazine of ammo, and some of them were just carrying around like empty magazines with their AKs. It was so I can't put all of the blame on the people, like on the soldiers themselves.
I don't. I of course I don't. I'm sure when we did give them a substantial amount of ammunition, they probably went to the bazaars and sold half of it on top of that.
Or they're commanders most likely, because they're not into sharing.
No, not really.
Oh,
but Zach and I were there at a time when the ALP was an absolute failure. Like, and I want to make all the listeners aware. I think that everything in Afghanistan is a failure. Some things are bigger failures than others, and one of those is the ALP. Zach, can you tell listeners a little bit about the Afghan local police?
I mean, yeah. So, kind of what I said earlier. It's you had coalition forces would go out to these villages typically on patrols with Afghan National Army or uniformed police or national police, and pretty much they'd strike these agreements with with local villagers, typically between 16 and 20 something years old, and basically the whole idea was we'll give them money and they'll help police the area. In the concept itself is not a bad idea.
Recruited
right?
from the local population. We talked about that
Yes.
earlier. Yeah, recruited from the local ethnic population. That's important.
It's essentially a militia that has their part of the fight is that they live there, so they don't want their village to be overrun by people who are going to enforce rules on them that they wouldn't necessarily agree with.
Right, but then they were poorly funded and supplied.
Yes.
And then at the same time, they might use their newfound or newly acquired weapons and go, oh yeah, I remember Baba John over at Loy Carez. He was a dick to me. He stole my goat. And then he used, you had ALP shootouts where you had these guys, I got arms now. Well, fuck that guy. And they'll go across the river and shoot up, their rival. Just like you saw with the warlords.
Or even better, the Taliban just, threaten their families once, and then they're like, well, I don't want to do this anymore. But the money is good.
Or the Taliban would just double what they were making, and they'd join the Taliban.
Yeah, it's easy to double somebody's pay when you're making like $2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so
I could pay the Afghan local police with what's under my couch right now.
I was going to say, guys, have we ever considered just going there and getting our own militia? I'm pretty sure we could afford it.
I'm pretty sure
the Charts militia.
Yeah, we had conversations about moving out there and becoming warlords.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a rough life, but I mean, it's there.
Maybe I should have invested in Dogecoin. We'd have the money to do
it.
the Dogecoin funded militia in Afghanistan, dude. If you guys want cryptocurrency banned in the United States, that's it. That'll be the story right there. The New York Times, former military analyst form a Dogecoin militia in Afghanistan. It's like,
make sure they call us millennials.
Oh yeah,
got to ruin everything.
Are millennials using cryptocurrency to fund a militia in a failed state? More at noon.
I guess I'd have to be the face of it, since you Gaijin can't be interfacing with the populace as much.
Stu, you could pass as an Afghan, couldn't you?
I could tell them that Dostum's my uncle, and as long as he never comes down south, we're good.
For those
Asian.
listening, Stu's dad, but your dad's what, half Filipino? Yeah. Full? He's one of those.
Half.
And your mom's white, and Stu looks like a Uzbek. Stu could go up to northern Afghanistan.
Stu could blend in.
He could blend right in.
Yeah, Stu could blend right in. You give him the local garb, and he would be, nobody would ask him questions until he opened his mouth.
He'd be perfect.
Yeah, he'd be fine. Be perfect.
All right, folks, that's going to wrap up episode 3 of The Boardwalk. Thank you for listening. If you join us next week, we are going to be talking about some of the major power brokers from our time in southern Afghanistan, and chief among them, and who will probably be the focal point of the episode, is going to be General Abdul Razik Acheksai, former chief of police for Kandahar province. Thank you. We'll see you next week.